to the message board. Still want Dave Hooker input on why Haslam wanted Schiano so bad. That still blows my mind on why they wanted to go in that direction. I mean, his resume alone and not the Penn State BS made it a bad hire, in my opinion. He was an okay coach at best. Well, I agree with that. I think he was an okay coach. I think he was also always a guy, kind of think of a poor man's Lane Kiffin, not as talented, but a guy that was always looking for a better job. I think I've told the story before to you, Caleb, about how his entire coaching staff was at Don Bosco Prep School in New Jersey, and he had taken the Bucks job and didn't tell them. So they're sitting in front of the high school coach and trying to recruit his kids, and he's the head coach of the Bucks. So I think, A, he was willing to pull the trigger. B, you still have to look at Tennessee. There were a lot of people in the football community questioning the Vols and what kind of a job that was. I never was. And I think I viewed him at the time as a solid coach, a B coach, better than Jeremy Pruitt, better. And I'm talking about my perspective from when they were hired. I viewed him as better than Jeremy Pruitt, better than Derek. I wouldn't say better than Derek Dooley, better than Jeremy Pruitt, kind of a wash with Butch Jones. And then I thought he was a better candidate than Derek Dooley at the time he was hired. How would you break down those hirings?
Yes, in terms of candidates, Schiano was probably on paper the best candidate Tennessee attempted to hire compared to the coaches they had hired up to that point. I think I got nothing nice to really say about Butch Jones. I know you don't either. He probably was the best hire on its face when you looked at resume at the time. 6 years, he had won 4 conference championships at 2 different schools. I know he followed Brian Kelly, but I do think you do have to win on your own to a certain degree. And he had certainly proven that he could recruit and stock a cupboard at smaller schools. Schiano, it wasn't just because, they tried to call Tennessee fans hypocrites at the time because they were like, if Nick Saban had the Penn State tie and you wanted him, you guys wouldn't have revolted. Yeah, because it's Nick Saban. It's worth the risk when you're hiring Nick Saban. Schiano had 1-11-2 season at Rutgers when he had Ray Rice and Kenny Britt, and the Big East was absolute garbage during that time. Towards the end, he was a mediocre coach at Rutgers, and then he stumbled in. By the way, I think he actually was a candidate for the Alabama job before the year Nick Saban was hired, funny enough.
Wow.
But yeah, stumbles into the Bucks job. And there were too many reports of him allegedly being a snake in the NFL, if we want to say that. I know that, a lot of sources suggest he publicly tried to leak out character issues with Josh Freeman, if you guys remember him.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like he was trying to do that, if I remember correctly, to try to get him to stay at Tampa at a bargain, to try to, hurt his market value. There are some stories about Greg Schiano and what he's done with athletes and who he throws under the bus that they were just, that combined with his mediocrity and, outside of 1-11-2 season, he wasn't that impressive of a coach to me. You're right. It was not a hire that made sense. And I think the biggest thing too was they tried to sneak through the hire on a Sunday afternoon, if you remember, and that's what upset so many people. When I think many Tennessee fans thought that they could get Dan Mullen or Chip Kelly or John Gruden. It doesn't look like they could have gotten any of them. They may have gotten Dan Mullen if John Curry didn't wait so long to fire Butch Jones. But the other two.
I said from the get it was Mike Leach, and that almost worked out.
Yeah.
A total accident. I would not have called Greg Schiano. The thinking was that Schiano, I believe, would have been a stepping stone coach to get you to kind of solidify the program. And at some point, he either leaves or you get a better coach. I never envisioned Greg Schiano being a 10-year coach. I never envisioned Derek Dooley or Butch Jones or Jeremy Pruitt being a 10-year type of coach. I do with Josh Heupel, but I truly believe, going back to what you said about John Curry, had he had complete freedom in that hire, I think he would have called Mike Leach first, and I think Mike Leach would have been the head coach of the University of Tennessee.
I want to agree with you, but my pushback on, I agree he would have picked Mike Leach over Greg Schiano. John Curry, don't get me wrong, his hands were tied because of Jimmy Haslam, but he's still the reason he's out. He's not the AD right now, because it wasn't just Greg Schiano. If you remember, between Greg Schiano and Mike Leach, John Curry, it's like if you ranked your list of coaches to hire on a sort of on a set of index cards, and then a hurricane came and blew all the cards out of order. That was John Curry in the order of hiring, because he first tried Mike Leach, then he tried, I believe, Mike Gundy. He first tried Greg Schiano, then he tried Mike Gundy, I believe.
Right.
Mike Gundy wasn't leaving Oklahoma State. He had already played Tennessee for a bigger contract 10 years ago. Mike Gundy has no desire to leave Oklahoma State.
He loves to flirt with other schools, and it's Tennessee more times than not.
Exactly. And then he tried Jeff Brom. Then he tried Dave Doran. And then he went to Mike Leach. If he had gone to Mike Leach immediately after Jimmy Haslam forced his hand with Greg Schiano and the hire backfired, and he had free reign, if he had gone to Mike Leach immediately after that, he'd still be athletic director. But he went through a round of other coaches he tried before then. If you remember, I believe he offered Jeff Brom the job, and Jeff Brom was going to take, and then the university hadn't reached an agreement with John Curry over what money to offer Jeff Brom at that point. So
it was a fiasco. I'll say this: Tennessee's in a lot better shape now. Now, I do believe that whole incident created a lot of frayed relationships, and with some of the biggest power brokers, the Haslams, the Mannings, some other great players that were asked to support the hire. And at the time when it went all up in flames, by the way, Ron Slay's running a little bit late. He'll join us here in just a bit. But when you look at those relationships, a lot of those are never coming back. And that may not be a bad thing, because I think that the University of Tennessee, I've said before that Big Jim Haslam was the best booster ever, because he wrote the checks. And if you had to make a major change like a Majors, you had to go to him, right? I mean, he was going to have to sign off on it. But was he meddling all the time? No. His son was the opposite. His son was the opposite, wanted to be involved, was still writing the check, and felt like he should be involved. And that was not going to work. I think you've seen what he's done with the Browns and the Deshaun Watson contract that is just unprecedented. And now it's throwing the NFL in flux. You know, Dan Snyder is one that's going to get kicked out of the NFL here, I believe, within the next probably 8-10 months. I think that's a matter of time. Don't be surprised if Jimmy Haslam is somewhere in that realm 2-3 years from now. He's doing things that a lot of owners don't like, and I think he would have done a lot of things that Tennessee didn't like. So at the end of the day, the Schiano fiasco probably absolved Tennessee of a lot of future problems, Caleb.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I think this has been a problem dating back to the early 90s, late 80s. I know Johnny Majors would publicly complain about the boosters at Tennessee a lot. And by the way, Johnny, you talk about emotionally sticking with a guy. That's one that worked out. Tennessee stuck with Johnny Majors through like 8 years of mediocrity because they loved him so much before the program turned around. But it did turn around. But yeah, I think this has been a problem at Tennessee dating back decades. I think there are a collection of boosters who have massive disagreements. I do know the story where basically John Curry tried to unite them all, and some of them basically gave him the middle finger because they're still mad that Phil Fulmer was fired back in 2008. And so
it was bad. So I guess to answer your question on the message board, Tennessee was not going to get who they wanted because they were a hot mess at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the girl you're dating who needs to work on some things, or the guy you're dating that needs to work on some things. Maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, after a stint in rehab, things can happen. But as of right now, it's a hard pass.
Right.
I don't know.
And this has been meddling by the boosters for years. I mean, you told me that they were the ones who forced through the Derek Dooley hire. They forced Mike Hamilton to make that hire. And
that's true. That is very true.